the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Australia's best independent news and opinion radio show, The Daily Australian, with Nicola Charles and Jason Olbourne.
Well, hello and welcome. Here we are, episode 104 for Tuesday, June the 4th, 2025. That means that we have a long weekend coming up here in Australia. Nicola Charles, welcome to the Tuesday edition.
Thank you, Jason. Welcome to you. I'm looking forward to the long weekend celebrations, but we're celebrating the King's birthday, so, you know.
Yeah, that's right. So, but any excuse for a holiday, I suppose, is a good thing. And and given that tonight in Australia, Oz Lotto, $70 million is going off, who knows? Maybe someone will have an opportunity to hold a really big party come the long weekend. What about that? Have you thought about buying a ticket?
Oh, I've always got a ticket. The lotteries are the only things that I do, and I buy them a month ahead. Often I forget to check them. But the thing I'm a bit worried about is we never see the winners anymore. You know, occasionally you'll hear that some 20-year-old girl who already lives in Bondi Beach has won 30 million. And you think, well, that's not fair with all the families that are struggling. And I think, which politician is she related to? But you just don't hear those I've won the lotto stories so much. So I've been a bit suspicious. My husband's given it up. He doesn't believe in it anymore. But I inherited that from my mum. So the reason is when you purchase that piece of paper, and they know it, they've so psyoped us, you're purchasing hope. As you say, Jason, it's better before you know you've lost.
Correct. I love that period after you buy before you lose, where you get to spend it in your mind. And I also I always laugh when people go, so it's $70 million. And my wife does it all the time. She said, oh, I'd take 5 million. I said, never negotiate with a lotto win. If you say you'll only take 5 million, you know you're going to lose. Just say how you're going to spend the 70 million and it should be more. And that way, at least you can feel positive about the fact that when you do lose, well, you went for the jackpot.
Don't we all plan, all of the people that we know and love, and some people that we don't know and love, how we're going to help them? You know, if it's a ridiculously large amount, of course, you don't need a ridiculously large amount. It's funny, isn't it? Because we're the on the ground regular peeps. And, you know, we always think about, okay, you know, you put money away for your kids, you buy the biggest country house you can find and drive the best cars. But then you start helping a whole bunch of strangers you've never met. And the elites have sort of sold themselves to us that that's what they do. And we're sort of starting to learn that possibly not. Possibly they just use them as a giant petri dish instead, Jason.
Oh, indeed. Well, my one dream that I have that the day that I win the 70 mil or whatever it is, I want to buy a regional IGA supermarket. How about that?
Yes, you said that.
I know, it's just my thing. I just think the idea of being able to first of all, be in a community where you know you can get a good food supply that's outside of the oligopoly, that you can employ local people, you can run your own race entirely, and you can subsidize as heavily as you want, and you can pretty much, you know, you can cook food there. One of the local IGAs near me, he has quite a big kitchen now that they cook roasts, not just chickens, but all sorts of things for the local community. He always has a really good supply.
The smells make you buy stuff when you go, oh my God, they're making a lamb roast. My butcher does that. I think, you know, I said something on X the other day. If you were to do that, Jason, and I think it's a fantastic idea, you're the first person who'd said you'd do something like that with a lottery win. Someone needs to open a small little chain, like we've got the small little organic stores, but they need to make it non-GMO. Now, I realize that would be very hard to stock. So you'd go in and there'd be a lot less choice, right? You wouldn't get all the vegetables you want and all that kind of thing. But a non-GMO and organic store, that's it. You've got my business. There's a lot of people in my family. We buy a lot of food. Most of the money goes on food. And I think that would be a really good idea because all these organic places, Jason, are selling genetically modified food that wasn't grown with chemicals. So it's a bit like that.
It's interesting because the other day I was in the one of the majors and I looked at their organic meat and it said no hormones, but I thought it doesn't say no bovea. So yeah, what's the ruling there on when you give it a brand name that it's organic? How do I know if it's just no hormones?
They don't have to tell you. They actually put that, I think they put that into legislation. They don't have to tell us, and they did that in America too. It's very naughty. King Charles III, whose birthday we're supposedly celebrating this weekend, he had these Duchy originals in the UK, which were biscuits and cookies and cakes and all these lovely, beautifully packaged organic foods. And it said it came from the royal estates, and people bought that stuff up in the UK. Like, they went crazy for it. And now he's done this flip and he's actually backing, we don't need to tell you if things are genetically modified. Yes, you do. Because I've heard some of this genetic modification, and it all goes back to Monsanto because they do it at the seed level. They've removed some of these enzymes that are anti-cancer. Thanks very much, fellas. And I'd really rather heritage seeds, heirloom seeds, whatever you call them, that have all their original enzymes. Because whenever something is bad for you in nature, nature provides an answer to it. And I feel like they're removing the natural answers to a lot of the illness questions that we have.
And we don't get the answers, do we? We just get a new paradigm that we're meant to literally just go along with and assume that everything that was the same yesterday is the same tomorrow when clearly it's not. So what are you supposed to do? So if anything, we talked about it recently, sort of eating local, growing local and being able to do that. I guess that's where that idea comes from, that you can sort of set your own standards and know that in the supermarket business, people need to eat all the time, obviously. So it would be a really cool thing to do. Maybe we don't need to, win any lottos. We can just sort of put a consortium together and do something. That'd be really cool.
Yes. Any investors out there that would like to invest in the Daily Australian non-GMO supermarket chain, we'll promote it for you. Let's do it.
Yeah, good call. Well, there's a lot to get on with again today. Big news, of course, with the Istanbul so-called negotiations that we now find are now further apart than they were before the attacks from Ukraine at Russia yesterday. So I think probably the best thing to do is to read off just a couple of quick summaries for people, just to bring them up to speed. There's a lot of talk around the traps, and you've got mainstream media supporting Ukraine. You've got those in independent media understanding what's really going on. And then you've got these sort of piggies in the middle, the Andrew Bolts of the world on Sky News, that are all pro-Ukraine, that don't quite fully understand what we see and what is going on there, and what perhaps Donald Trump sees, etc. So it's deliberately a grey area. But the reality is like this. So the talks between Russia and Ukraine took place in Istanbul today. Russia's demands haven't changed. They want Ukraine to stay out of NATO, demilitarization, denazification, the 4 eastern oblasts, and full end to the conflict. Ukraine continued to refuse this proposal. They want a temporary 30-day ceasefire to resupply. They want NATO membership, which would immediately initiate full-scale World War III, and they want all of their land back that Russia occupy. In other words, Ukraine are still in denial that they have lost the war. Negotiations going nowhere, and Putin is going to continue to bludgeon them and bleed them out of their resources while destroying all NATO equipment that gets sent to Ukraine. Despite whatever the media say, Russia have been dominant. And the entire time, Ukraine have zero leverage whatsoever. Putin does not have to make any concessions. If Ukraine do not want to capitulate, Putin will just keep going until Ukraine cannot fight anymore, and then he'll take over whatever he wants. It's as simple as that. Zelensky and his NATO handlers have never had any intention of surrendering. Their objective is to provoke Putin into using nukes or excessive force so they can drag in the US military via NATO to fight Russia directly for them. They want World War III. They want to destroy Russia by any means necessary because Putin refuses to bow to the deep state and their quest for global hegemony. The deep state want to dethrone Putin and take over Russia, and they know that they need the US military in order to pull it off. This is why they're pushing so hard for Ukraine to be a NATO member, and why they're trying to provoke Putin. They're trying to force this US military to directly intervene and defeat Putin. That's what the deep state wants. That's what Ukraine has been about, going back to at least 2014 and probably decades before that. This has always been their ultimate objective with Ukraine at World War III and the destruction of Russia, Nicola. And those words come from Clandestine and other commentators who have been following this all the way through. How do you see it at this point? Are they on track, do you think? Is Clandestine right? Or do we have to sort of play this theatre out a little bit more before we get the intervention of perhaps Donald Trump working out where he's going to come into this? Or has he sort of rubbed his hands of it and we just let it play out? It's a mystery.
I think since, well, a long time before the 2016 US election, the deep state, the Hillary Clintons, and we don't know who the others are. We'll never know. It'd be good to expose them because that's what they don't want. I think there was a very, very long plan to get Russia, because what it looks like to me is that a country, Ukraine, is guilty of incitement, and certain leaders around the world are also guilty of incitement. I mean, Mr. Keir Starmer, there are some incredible clips going around the UK of everyday British people saying that you've brought in these young fighting age males from all over the world into our country. Unlike the new Australians who are working very hard, and it costs them $100,000 to come here, apparently. And they're getting on their feet and they seem like economic migrants. The migrants into the UK are very different. They're put up in 5-star hotels and use them as apartments. They're given money and cars and electric scooters and seemingly are not charged with any crimes because it's 2-tier care and it's a 2-tier justice system. And what Brits are saying is, so you brought in all these young fighting age males, but now you're telling British people who you have, in a wholesale manner disregarded throughout this, migration push, to go and fight a war that we don't agree with against a country we have no beef with. Why don't you send your new Britons, your new fighting age males, so that they can sort of give back, I guess, to the country that has welcome them in? But that's not what they're suggesting. And of course, you've always got this talk going around of national service. And I can tell you now, there's no way that families in the UK, after what Keir Starmer has put them through, will willingly give up their children. I think people would rather go to jail in the UK than go and fight a war that is probably certain death up against Russia. I mean, I heard, Jason, that a lot of countries, and one of them was Germany, which surprised me, are actually so depleted of munitions now because they've sent so many to Ukraine that were they to face a war right now, they'd have nothing to defend themselves with, which is really worrying if Russia does decide, as it could, to turn its aggression on countries beyond Ukraine, i.e. other NATO countries. So I feel Ukraine and others are very much guilty of incitement to violence, and it surprises me, because I come from a generation, as do you, where someone who was considered a leader in any way in a country would have rhetoric that was very much talking diplomacy. How can we resolve these issues so that everyone kind of gets out alive and we avoid a war? That sort of ended with George Bush Jr. when he came in, and Barack Obama, given the Nobel Peace Prize whilst invading 7 countries. We don't have diplomacy anymore. So other than Donald Trump, I don't think there's anyone trying to resolve these issues.
It's interesting, isn't it, that the one person that they try and heap all the hatred on is the peacemaker. A tweet today from Trump himself: just had a great talk with our military leaders. It is the strongest military we've ever had, including the fact that we are stockpiling weapons at a rate never seen before by our country. Hopefully, however, we will never have to use them. He also tweeted out this: the auto pen, meaning Joe Biden, should have stopped Iran a long time ago from enriching. Under our potential agreement, we will not allow any enrichment of uranium. So Iran has rejected negotiations with the United States, so they seem to push on. This will be a bargaining chip, of course, so they will reach a stage of a peace deal, because they've already suggested that they would walk away from that if the sanctions were lifted, implying what Donald Trump has been all along. He wants to replace military aggression and perpetual wars with a system of economics to free up all countries around the world to have an economic bonanza, if you will, where people can actually live and get ahead in life. And this is part of this strategy, it seems, to remove terrorism from all of these countries that are beholden by it, which we've obviously seen now. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out, because peace and prosperity rules over eternal wars and the NATO system. And here are the usual suspects from NATO, if you will. There's a few there that have since moved on. I think
Look at Keir Starmer front and centre. My God.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't that amazing, though? Such a weak leader, but to think that he's the captain of that team based on that position.
Shouldn't Zelensky be front and centre, Jason? That is very odd.
Well, isn't it funny? I mean, he's not even in NATO, and there he is having a photograph as if he's part of NATO. If ever there was an illustration of what actually is going on here, that those warmongers, the systems of perpetual war, are there, right there. And interesting, of course, there is no Donald Trump anywhere near those photographs.
No, but there is Ursula von der Leyen, and she's unelected. So what's she doing there?
Good point, and that's the point, isn't it? It's very odd. Now, you can see that Georgia Maloney's up the back there standing next to Justin Trudeau, so it's an older picture. But again, you wouldn't think that Maloney would want to be part of that relationship. And, of course, there are others in the NATO arrangement that you wouldn't expect to be the case. So very, very interesting. At the same time today, we've learnt that there's a new president of Poland. He's a conservative, and he's a friend of Donald J. Trump. Here's a report from Reuters. It's a short one. I'll put it up there for you now to give you the details. Here we go.
Nationalist opposition candidate Karol Nawrocki has won Poland's presidential election. The country's electoral commission early on Monday had Nawrocki with nearly 51% of the votes, and his rival, Liberal Rafał Trzaskowski, with just over 49%. The results were a whiplash from the night before, when an exit poll had shown Trzaskowski winning by a razor-thin margin, which led the candidate to declare a premature victory. Zwyciężyliśmy! The Electoral Commission also said that polls set a record turnout for the second round of a presidential election, at around 71%. Nawrocki's win deals a blow to the reform agenda of the pro-European government. The 42-year-old is a Eurosceptic historian who campaigned on a promise to ensure economic and social policies that favor Poles over other nationalities, including refugees from neighboring Ukraine. Nawrocki, who is supported by the Law and Justice Party, is expected to continue the policies of his predecessor, President Andrzej Duda. That includes blocking any attempts by the government to relax restrictions on abortion or reform the judiciary. While Poland's parliament holds most power, the president can veto legislation. The vote has been closely watched in Ukraine, as well as Russia, the United States, and across the European Union.
He looks quite young. He's got a nice face. Let's hope he doesn't let us down. I've got some really great Polish friends, and often I do speeches at the Polish Club in Melbourne, and I can tell you it's probably my favorite community, and they're actually a very awake community, and I find Polish people to be quietly proactive in the background. They don't scream and shout about it so much, but they are certainly not happy with the Labour Party here in Australia, let's just say.
So there is a resistance, isn't there, in Europe? So you've got Hungary, you've got Poland, and of course you've got Russia, who is the enemy of the enemy, who we're meant to be on side with the NATOs. So there is a sort of a rearguard action coming out of there. And of course we saw what happened in Romania with the shenanigans there and the removal of the candidate that had won in the runoff election. So they were playing up there. So Eastern Europe's moving in a different direction. And some of these are NATO partners, Romania, Poland, etc. So Hungary. So if there is a divide, then there is an awareness that there is something that is not right. And so it is that the leaders of the West, the so-called UK and France, etc., and Germany broke, running out of munitions. UK weak, France weak, also penalising and punishing political opposition. This is not a sign of strength. This is an empire.
Such a shame.
This is an empire on its knees, faking it trying to invoke World War III to remain relevant. So the coolness in the situation means that Putin, who is the one that they call the aggressor, if he was, wouldn't he just fire off and blow everyone up?
Yeah.
Why is it that he's the one that's restrained, and why Zelensky, who is a dead man walking, is the one that's provoking? Do you recall when that missile went over the fence and into Poland? And this was a year or so ago, and they tried. Zelensky came out and tried to blame Russia, and within hours, Joe Biden came out and said the trajectory was all wrong. This didn't come from Russia, which meant that it came from Ukraine. Yeah. And of course, he gets away with it. I mean, the same as the pipeline. We saw that scenario. So, look, this is a man who is literally a terrorist, who is also a puppet, protecting a regime that we know is the criminal center of Europe and the Western world. This is the money laundering hub, the child protection, the child trafficking hub, the drug trafficking hub, and we've got to pretend that it's not. And at least here on the independent media, we can bring that up and we can talk about it.
Jason, I think NATO took out that pipeline. Now I think about it, I think NATO might be the deep state, right? It's the military arm that is working militarily for an end. I think they want Russia. I mean, Russia is massive. It's actually all of the maps, because I studied geography at school, all of the maps, when you talk about flat earthers and stuff, I don't believe that. But you look at the map, they always put Russia way over there and America way over there, as if they're the furthest away possible. But from Alaska, you can see Russia. It's actually, because we are round, it's actually very, very close. And I think, when you're talking about gas and coal and rare earth minerals, I think Russia is so rich in that stuff. I think for a long time, with littler countries, America, NATO side of America, has engaged in, and they've done it in Ukraine as well, in overthrows of government, right? And then they've sort of got control via NATO, because we're going to protect you. It's very Sopranos of countries, right? But I think the big tamale, the one they really wanted, was always Russia. And we've been building up to this for the last 20 years.
Yep. Well, it's obvious to a point, isn't it, that if you are going to create a one world government, you need to have Russia under your arm. You can't have Russia opposing, much like China, whereas they're using the Chinese model to adopt to become a one world government. So they don't technically need China to be on side with them. They're just going to.
But isn't it dangerous? Jason, isn't that dangerous for China? If they did get Russia, let's just say they get Russia, NATO, right? America takes Russia, essentially. Doesn't that put China in a very difficult situation, because they'd be sort of isolated geopolitically and economically, potentially? Doesn't that mean that China, if push really came to shove, has more of a reason to align itself with Russia?
Indeed. China is very good at faking it. They talk a tough game. They play a very straight face, but they're not very tough. And they'd like to talk it up. And so it's interesting, isn't it? And regardless of the numbers. Now, the other thing, of course, is how do we know that that China is faking it? Well, their population is an interesting one. There are many sources that are telling us that whilst their population has been in decline, and they're now definitely not the most populous nation on earth, India now takes that officially. China's sort of around that 1.2, 1.3 billion. Well, many people are saying it's way, way less than that.
Yes,
and that's an interesting part. So let's say they're even at 1 billion. Some are saying 800 million, whatever. And it's very hard to work that out. But that would mean that they don't have the muscle that they once had, even though that's more than every other country bar India in the world. So that's a big resource. But then we've seen these ghost cities. We've seen an economy that's struggling. We've seen a resistance among young people not wanting to have children. There is that's happening everywhere in the world, but particularly in China, it's very unusual. So they are not the strength that they make themselves out to be. So they need Russia, and that's probably why the BRICS alliance was formed, because you think of it, if you put Russia, China and India together as an economic bloc, that is very powerful, considering that free trade allowed China and India to grow and to prosper. And then they use Russia as their military might, China as their factory, and India as their technology and backup factory. That's a very, very powerful economic bloc to work in there. Then you've got Brazil as the big country of South America. You talk about South Africa, which South Africa can almost discard at this point, but then they bring in Saudi Arabia in the BRICS Plus arrangement. I don't know why they brought Ethiopia in so soon, but that's probably, if anything, a nod to try and get some power back from Tedros, who's the head of the WHO, who comes from Ethiopia. So there's different strategic points there. You know what's interesting about this, Nicola, is that you only ever become interested in geopolitics when it affects you. And for the first time ever, when we all understood that this was a one world government, was the story behind the scenes, was when, for mine, I got interested in geopolitics. But there's just so many different, sort of levers and positions and pieces on this chessboard. And then you try and work out who stands for what. So we know that Trump is a nationalist. We know that Putin is a nationalist. And we know that technically China is a nationalist with an eye on the world, but they're not really willing to play it quickly. They're playing a very, very long game, which was to maybe bankrupt the West, and that way they could buy like they have done, with the Darwin port, etc. Just on that, interesting that before the election, there was a big call from both sides of politics that they would remove the lease from China for the Darwin port. Well, now that Albanese's been returned, they're very silent. So we might try and sort of reach out and find out what's going on there, because if they want to build the confidence up of the people, they'd want to act on it, and they certainly wouldn't want to forget about it. And maybe we'll make a point to the Liberals and the Nationals, hey, what are you guys going to do? Put some pressure on these people about a promise that they said that they would make. But there it is, the breakdown of how that's sort of playing out at the moment.
I'm quite worried about Russia and Russians because, as I said, it feels like an incitement to violence, right? So we're pushing Vladimir Putin here. This is Russia. All of my life, over half a century, the one thing people have hoped for is not to have a war with Russia. And yet you've got the likes of Keir Starmer out there gunning for it, even our own PM here in Australia. What would happen? Trump has already referenced, and I believe this 100% more than I believe any other narrative I've ever looked at, that he said, we have weapons you can't even imagine. And we know there are weapons. We've seen them. They've practiced them. We've seen the lasers. We've seen the weather modification. Weather modification is a weapon. They started using this in the Vietnam War to create typhoons. This isn't a new technology. So let's assume America and NATO have weapons we can't even imagine. We know they fiddle around with biological weapons. If Putin is pushed and strikes and he knows it, that's the moment. That's the justification to take Russia, and they could flatten it. They could end the lives of virtually everyone in every major city in Russia. And they will take Russia. And then we're all in real trouble, actually. They're asking us to side with a war against Russia. But if we do, if we support NATO and this incitement to violence and it kicks off, as you say, that is probably one of the final stages for the one world government. We would be essentially shooting ourselves in the foot. I think NATO would be so emboldened. They would have control of everything, and there would literally be nowhere else to go. I mean, lots of Americans have defected and gone to Russia, particularly journalists who wanted freedom of speech. So I do think, you referenced yesterday the Cuban Missile Crisis, not wishing to create any fear, but I do think we are in one of the most, going to have to say it, dangerous times in history geopolitically, because these people have shown us already in our own domestic populations that they are prepared to do almost anything, Jason. In fact, anything to get what they want. They have killed already their own. So what are they prepared to do to get Russia?
Russia has a kind of a fail-safe that under imminent threat, they release all their nuclear arsenal at once, which basically means the world will be blown up. So they know that they're going to have to tread very carefully here. And this is the point, isn't it, that they're trying to justify their provocation is not a provocation to make Putin sort of trip over at that point. But Putin, you would assume, is too smart for this and cool in the crisis, and realizing that he's playing against a very weak army in what NATO is, these particular characters, none of whom are any sort of a great general. They're a bunch of, it's very clear what they're trying to do and what they're up against in a system.
And after
that is
double-crossing populations, Jason, the populations aren't willing to fight for NATO. Brits are saying that today.
Interesting, isn't it? Now, the one thing that they got out of these negotiations was an agreement to release all of each other's prisoners and the dead. So at least there's some sort of movement there. So they want to have an all for all is what they call it. So all of the Ukrainian prisoners return, all of the Russian prisoners return, and all of the dead returned as well, which of course there will be many, many thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, and assuming there will be the same in Russian. So look, it's a tragic scenario, whichever way you look at it. But it's the provocation and the use of this puppet Zelensky against Putin, that these characters to try and do that, to think that Zelensky knows he's a dead man walking. So the only thing he's got going for him at this point is to become literally Dr. Strangelove.
Why'd you say that? Why'd you say he's a dead man walking?
At the end of this, Zelensky doesn't survive. The crimes against Zelensky will come out. He can't win the election. The corruption will come out. The biolabs, etc. This man does not. He does not survive at the end of this. The only thing he can really do is run away with a few $100 million and hide in exile in some Venezuelan nation, something like that, wherever he's going to be able to go. Not that it's going to be Venezuela, but something as obscure as that. But no, he knows he's in big trouble. Yeah, it's a horrific scenario. And of course, the innocent people of the world who have been hoodwinked and bad media sort of perpetuating this thing like we're always right, we're always wrong. It's not like that. And what we've heard now in these particular comments explaining what's really going on. And what's more interesting, I think, is the fact that Trump is staying out of it. He's cast his rod, and it was, he didn't catch anything. So he's sitting back now and he's letting it all happen. So we'll see. But
they'd be ready.
Works.
They'd be militarily ready.
Oh, of course they will. But what we are now seeing that if Trump technically as the US president would be the de facto head of NATO, regardless of Mark Rutte or anyone there, being the head of NATO, nothing works without the United States. That's what he said in his first term. He said, none of you guys are paying your way. We're paying for everything here. You're just part of it. You attend the meeting. So the first thing he did was got them more actively involved. Now, Trump will play this beautifully down the line. He will be part of NATO, but you can tell that he's distant from it. He's expecting them to pony up the money to keep going. And what that has done is literally weakened them because they've sent all their resources, as you've talked about, like Germany, over to Ukraine. In fact, there was a photograph on Telegram today of an Abrams tank that was captured unharmed in Ukraine that was donated by either US or by Australia. Because Australia sent over some 45 or 49 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, and they're wondering, is this one of the ones that Albanese has donated? So it was captured purely perfect. However much they're worth, they've got to be worth millions of dollars, and there it was, literally showroom condition. Extraordinary. So what's going on, and how many resources can you send over? Now, there was another photograph I saw, and I haven't uploaded it for today's show, of the different type of military missiles that Russia has in their stockpiles. They have 6 different types of missile that can travel more than 10,000 kilometers.
Does that reach Australia?
Reaches anywhere in the world. 6 different types. Not 6 of them, 6 different styles. So however many more they have of them. So the one, and so when I say they let them all off in the case of an attack, in other words, you want to go after us, you're going to blow up the planet. Now, it's interesting. I think
won't they pick somewhere small fry as a warning?
Well, let's hope that they don't even require the warning. But I tell you what, when you are Zelensky, walking around in that stupid skivvy, pretending that you're someone important.
He's a stripper. He's a stripper from a talent show.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah. So is he the one that's going to be smarter than Putin? This is what I don't get about the West. We really do masquerade like we know what we're talking about, and we send these puppets in and give them all this power. And of course, he's unelected. His term expired a long time ago. So he's literally a dictator, and there they are defending democracy. Bullshit.
How do we end up with all these unelected people? We've got Jacinta Allen, the state premier here in Victoria. She's demolishing us. She's putting us in debt. She's giving away jobs for the mates with her union mates and her construction mates. And there's obviously deals that have been done here. Dan Andrews himself, who installed her, he's gone into business on St Kilda Road with a Chinese counterpart. And, they're either in the business of, bringing in more PCR tests for take 2 or he's in the business of knowing what's going to be built in this state. in the next few years. I just don't understand how these unelected people get away with it. I mean, how they can stop that Ursula von der Leyen in Europe is extraordinary, because no one agrees with her. Who's installing her? Who's the person?
European Parliament. It's a mystery, isn't it? How that whole scenario plays out, and the people that go along this low information situation, that you just follow the establishment because the alternative is that they're crazy. And that's the thing that I can't ever work out, is that the bargain that people are prepared to accept just because it's authority telling them that that's the best there is, why you wouldn't even want to know what the alternative is, if that makes sense. It's like when Chinese motor vehicles landed on our shore, most people were quick to dismiss that they would be rubbish. If it's related to like other Chinese-made products, they can't be very good. And so the first series, for the first 10 years, most of them weren't particularly great. They had no resale value. Engines would blow up at 70,000 kilometers. But now, in the era of phase 2, when China's bringing out all these electric vehicles, no one seems to care anymore that it's a Chinese-made electric vehicle. Even Teslas, some of them made in China. Polestar, which is a Volvo-based electric vehicle.
They should care. There was recently a court case in Australia where LDV were found guilty, which is such a shame because that originated from a British brand, Leyland DAF. LDV were found, they were using older metals to build the frames of vehicles like your vans and your utes, and then newer metals on the outside. And these vehicles were found to be rusting from the inside out. So you can't see it. And when you buy your nice new shiny LDV, it looks great, but inside it's rusting away. And they were found guilty of that. And people's vehicles have been recalled. So you do really need to think about how much do Chinese car manufacturers give a shit about Australian buyers. What annoys me about this unelected stuff, Jason, is if you look at Ursula von der Leyen in the European Parliament, and what else have we got here? We've got the Prime Minister, who we've got footage. I've got footage of Anthony Albanese referencing the Governor General, who answers to the King, as the most senior politician in Australia. So you all think you're all psyoped with your democracy that the most senior politician is your Prime Minister. It's not. It's the Governor General. And so it looks like we've got this layer of democracy, but there's always someone placed just above it who can veto, anything that you want to happen. And Ursula von der Leyen is very much that as the president of the European Parliament. So I really think what we've been told about democracy for a long time is probably not the truth. I mean, even in America, you've got Donald Trump, the president, right? The commander in chief, we're told. And we know that he's pushing back against the deep state. But he's clearly now, Jason, not in control of NATO. And NATO is believed to be America. So NATO is, by definition, the deep state. Well, Trump doesn't have control of the deep state then, because NATO want Russia.
And the best part of that is that now it's a war between the Trump administration and NATO, and it plays out one way. And that way plays out, we would assume, would be permanently at that point. So this is the stage is most certainly set. So we will watch on as we do and continue to report with what's happening. Now, we haven't done some health stories for a little while, and I thought that we might start with the basics and then build up to where we're headed in this particular story today. So it starts off that Elton John has announced that he has got COVID. He's postponed his Dallas concerts. Fortunately, I'm fully vaccinated and boosted and my symptoms are mild. Well, good on you, Elton. That's probably how it works when you think that that's how it works, right? Meanwhile, all of these people that I'm about to put up on screen are vaccinated, and this is Mark Crispin Miller, who writes this. He writes his Substack News from Underground. He's a professor of media culture and communication at New York University, founder of the News from Underground. He's just reported that Rod Stewart has had to cancel his Las Vegas residency on June the 1st for being ill. Billy Joel, as we know, has got a brain condition, so he's effectively stood down. Ace Frehley from KISS has got to cancel his shows. There was a medical emergency in Utah that caused the cancellation of a concert, and TV host Tobias Hansen suffered a cardiac arrest and helped by a cardiologist. And these were all in the last week or so. But that's just a sample of what Mark Crisper-Miller reports on almost weekly now, and there's always at least 10 names in each of his stories. You can check him out on Substack. Now, also on Substack for a little bit of news, one of our friends, someone I've certainly interviewed a few times, Dr. William Mackus, has announced that he's now 4th on the list of all health politics writers on Substack. There's the charts. He's now ahead of Alex Berenson, who was once at number 1. He's ahead of Robert Malone, ahead of Peter McCullough, Steve Kirsch, Pierre Corey. And ironically, I don't even know who Jeff Childers is. I haven't been reading Jeff's stuff, so he's at number 3. Joe Mercola, who I think is brilliant, number 2, and a Midwestern doctor, who I assume is a she, is an incredible writer with some great stuff at number 1 there. So that's interesting. And Substack, and of course, the Daily Australian we publish every day on Substack as well. Now, another story we covered last week was Bobby Kennedy, Marty Makari, and Jay Bhattacharya are announcing that they had removed COVID vaccines for children, healthy children, and pregnant and healthy pregnant women. Well, we've now learnt that this is not the case. The Kingston report, this is Karen Kingston, that is her Substack. The CDC is still recommending the COVID-19 shots for everyone, reports Karen on May 30. Both Maha and the biopharma industry were confused by RFK's announcement that the CDC had stopped recommending the COVID shots for healthy adults and children. And she's reporting there that they're still recommending it, which is very disappointing that they would defy literally a change of policy.
So now you know. Now you know who controls the CDC and the FDA. It's NATO. NATO control them. That's why they haven't changed. I've said for a long time, there are 2 Americas right now. There's the People's America, and Donald Trump is their president. That's how they want that country run. NATO want it run like the Death Star, like some military advantage, bioweapons development, breaking all biological and chemical weapons treaties, uber monster who wants to become the one world militarized government. That's what it will be. And they want Russia. And we know that. The fact that the CDC hasn't changed one iota after that announcement means what? It's what I just said. Our democracy is fluttering around down here somewhere. They've got someone above going, yeah, no, I don't think so.
You can't do it, so they're trying it on, and we'll see what plays out here. And the end game will be that however that works through the judiciary, and you have an FBI and you have a Department of Justice, will it force a military intervention? Hopefully it will, and it seems that we're getting very, very close. Well, yesterday on mainstream radio on 2SM, one of our former colleagues, and his name is Chris Smith, and he worked at TNT, as did we. There it was when Chris got his gig on TNT. He's no longer there, of course, because he took up a gig this year to be the morning show presenter on 2SM. Chris has finally admitted something that he didn't agree with when we worked with him at TNT. Take a look at this.
Bad things happening.
Every major study that I've looked at, mainstream study, has told me how wrong I was during the pandemic. To believe government, to believe big pharma, to believe eminent immunologists was wrong, and it's proved that way.
Yeah.
We've had far too many serious injuries and deaths from the jab.
The first person of influence in this country that's actually done that, and just to get the word out there so people will start to believe it.
You can't. Well, but you got to tell the truth, That's the truth.
Hang on, that's considered, isn't that considered far right these days?
Whatever it's considered, but I got it wrong. I wish I'd known then what I knew then. But I had eminent immunology. Anyway, no excuse. I should have considered that it was taking too quick a time to put a vaccine on the market, and we should have been a lot more, we should have scrutinised it a lot more. Having said that, people need to do their own research from Cleveland, Oxford University, and from New Zealand. 3 mainstream studies showing that the injuries that have occurred from, and the deaths that have occurred from the COVID vaccine have exceeded all the advice we got from Big Pharma.
Yep.
And,
are you aware of something called Open Day N? Have you heard of that before?
Tell our listeners about it.
Okay, it's our version of theirs, which is the adverse events register, where people can actually go and register when they believe they've been damaged by a vaccine.
Right. How do they do that again? How do they gravitate to that, especially for people listening?
Oh, look, apparently it's really difficult to do because they're making you jump through hoops. It's hard to get onto it. I was speaking to a lady at the Forest a few weeks ago, and she said it was very difficult to get on. And the thing is, if you do get on, it's actually illegal to get on there and not be telling the truth. So
illegal to get on and not tell the truth, because that's what you're going to do, is you're going to go on there and make up a story about somebody who was injured, because that's what you would do when the opposite has always held that the TGA would decide whether the vaccine caused an injury by them sitting around a room and looking at the words written on a report. But
the TGA, who are 96% funded by Big Pharma.
Yeah. And of course, we knew that the only vaccine that they said it ever caused a death was AstraZeneca, and anything that was Pfizer was automatically just ignored, as was Moderna, when we know the opposite's not the case. But that's interesting that Chris Smith, now on 2SM, would do that. Now, Chris has been interviewing, he interviews John Ruddick, who he interviewed on TNT, he interviews Pauline Hanson, who he interviewed on TNT. But the point being that he's now reaching out in scope, and it's what I find fascinating about it is that people will be interviewed on a terrestrial radio station, whereas some will resist being on the internet, on social media, uploaded media shows. But when TNT was going, they were happy to do it then. So it shows you the need for professionalism again in the media, just supports it once again, and also the idea of reach. Now, I would think that 2SM's reach isn't a whole lot bigger than what we get on a good day. So that's just a comparison there, but it does bring in a certain type of listener.
I said yesterday on social media, it's a great example. I truly believe they've lost control of us, and it's magnificent. It's magnificent that they've lost control of us, and they've lost control of us because they broke our trust, because they lied to us and then told us we were guilty of misinformation. So I'm glad that you've lost us. You've lost the people. We won't fight in wars for you. We won't become medical experiments and inject strange things for you. We won't do those things for you anymore. My God, there are people going to great lengths to not pay tax anymore. They don't agree with you so much. You've lost the people, and they're going to have to work very hard to get them back. So this isn't a case of this, two countries, and it's the same here, 2 Australias, like Albanese all over Australian voters about consider what's best for you locally, vote for me. And then as soon as he gets elected, he nicks off overseas to get his instructions from Brussels, right? You've not got the people. Right. So if you've got any enemies coming here or anything like that, you better ask yourself how safe you're going to be. I know these politicians have all got their outs and their houses. They've probably all got houses on Little St. James or something, Jason. But yes, they've lost the people, and now you're losing the media, and you really didn't want to lose control of the media, did you? But unless these people are reporting now on someone's cat getting stuck up a tree, then they're going to look like bald-faced liars, because the truth is out there, and the truth is the truth. You can't deny it. And if you're not reporting on it, then you're lying. And this is why your viewership is so low.
Absolutely. Look, other news we reported yesterday, Mohamed Soliman, the person who threw those Molotov cocktails, he has now been charged, including federal hate crimes, along with a bunch of state crimes. So a statement from Pam Bondi, the Department of Justice, has swiftly charged the illegal alien perpetrator of this heinous attack with a federal hate crime. Will hold him accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Our prayers and with the victims of and the Jewish community across the world. So that's a big statement. So they're talking there about hate crimes. If convicted of all charges, he will go to jail for 600 years. They're talking about there. So massive.
Well, this is the problem when you allow these male illegal migrants to come into your country. Same in the UK. Doesn't seem to be the same in Australia. Seems more families. But the UK and America, when you let these single males leave their families behind, they might have wives, children. They've definitely got parents. They leave their families behind to take an opportunity to go to a country on the other side of the world. Maybe you should start asking yourselves why. Why would they do that? Why do they want to be there? If you haven't taken your family, you're not a family man. So what are you?
Indeed. Now, we now learnt today that China, would you believe this, have discovered an $83 billion gold mine, which has thrown the market into a frenzy. It's suggested that with initial drilling down 2,000 metres, they've uncovered 40 gold veins. The preliminary detection alone is estimated to hold around 330 tonnes of gold. That's equivalent to 330,000 kilograms of gold ore. The return on such is said to be something like 138 grams of gold bullion out of every tonne. And it means that when you estimate and extrapolate that, they're looking at somewhere around $83 billion, which would make it the largest gold mine on Earth. Currently, the existing largest is in South Africa, which is meant to be one of the largest, holding around 1,000 tons of gold. So this one, not as big as that one, but looks like it could head that way, but massive nonetheless. That's a huge discovery. Meanwhile, in other Chinese news, particularly talking about this particular journalist, Cheng Li, she has described in an article that's come out today in the news media, Murdoch, about this state of the torture that she underwent and her crime for being put into prison for a long period of time and told to sit still for 13 hours a day, not even be able to scratch her face. Clearly, I couldn't cope with the torture over there in China, having scratched my face about 12 times this hour alone. She described it for sharing with another journalist an embargoed article, simply not sharing it publicly, simply discussing an article that was embargoed. In other words, you receive a piece of information, you're allowed to release it at a certain time, but you're not allowed to release it before said time. That's what an embargo is.
So for having freedom.
Yeah,
and,
for her
and
just
Albo
discussing
wants
it.
Australia to be more like China. Nice one. Nice one.
Exactly. Well, maybe Clive James gets the reward. You sent me this one earlier, Nicola. This little comment here that you found in the Daily Mail, as the late great Australian critic and journalist Clive James once observed, the problem with Australians is not that so many of them are descended from convicts, but so many of them are descended from prison officers. I see this slavish adherence to rules and pettifogging everywhere at all levels of society, from the individual to the state. It's a very good observation there from the late, great Clive James.
Yeah. Yeah, you do often think about that, and you think about Australians descended from all those prisoners, and it's been removed from the internet now. When I was doing my podcast in the middle of the pandemic, I did research and managed to get off the internet before it was memory hold, all the pictures of the mistreatment, because I was focusing on The Voice, the mistreatment of the Aboriginals in Australia. And it was by the prison guards, it was by the captains of the ships and their men, sent over by the Crown. And so my argument was it's the Crown that owes reparations to the Indigenous tribes, not the people of Australia, who were told go to the New World and build it for us, which is exactly what they did. And it's interesting that those pictures are missing now. You can't find them. So, and I've got them. There was pictures of these officers doing it to children as well, with hitting them with butts of guns, and they were hiding in bushes, and it was just absolutely appalling. So Clive James, who was very famous in the UK, by the way, very funny guy, he must have preferred it in the UK, Jason. He was the opposite of me. I preferred it in Australia. So we swapped. You got me, Australia, and England got Clive James. Well, that's probably not a very good deal.
No. He was a very, very talented man, and he could just, the analysis, and of course that amazing speaking voice that Clive James had, very, very distinct.
So
yeah, absolutely. Well, as we near the end of today's episode, I thought it might be time to introduce a new segment. And the reason that I came up with this was because of a video that actually appeared today, and therefore it led to the very aptly titled segment. I'll play it for you now, and we'll come back. I've got a couple of clips to share with you.
He only just fit, his spine is like scraping the panel at the top.
How did he get through the doorway? I can't work it out. But there we have in Thailand today an elephant literally inside a convenience store, and now for the elephant in the room. So there are two clips that I want to share. Nicola, this is one that you found and sent to me. And this is just to explain how it was almost accepted that this was the way that Hollywood business was done. This is Shirley Temple speaking to Larry King.
But how about producers and directors and all the stories we've heard?
When I left Fox, I went to MGM for one picture. Thank goodness, only one. And when I got there with my mother, we were separated. She went into the office of Louis B. Mayer, and I went into the office of Arthur Freed. And he was going to talk to me about a movie he wanted to put me in. I'm 12 years old, you know. And I thought he was a producer, but instead he was an exhibitor. And I'd never seen anyone naked before, except myself. So I had no clue about what was happening. And so it struck me so funny, I laughed at him. And I laughed uproariously. I had tears, you know. And he got infuriated. And he said, out, 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 go.
Did you tell your mother?
Well, I went down. I was very quiet. I went down and met her in the lobby of the administration building. She came out very quietly from Louis B. Mayer's office. And we walked hand in hand silently to the car, which was unusual. I said, Mom, you won't believe what happened to me. And I told her what happened, and she got kind of quiet. And she said, well, you don't know what happened to me. And Louis B. Mayer wasn't as bad as Freed was to me.
Have you tried
but he came on to my mother. And so we both decided that we didn't like MGM much. It was, you know, it was better at Fox.
Poor thing. Gorgeous lady.
Isn't it interesting, though, that the resilience of Shirley Temple, admittedly this was, you know, many years later, but the fact that she had to laugh it off, it was like she'd built a resistance or a force field around her. But at the same time, what we are learning that this is the price of fame.
She was 12.
Yeah. And they tried the same trick on her mother by separating them. I just find that absolutely horrific. And you know that this is a business model that's been going on, and it can only get worse and worse as this goes on. Now, we know that all business comes at a cost. I can recall being a university student working in a local suburban video store and getting a little bit upset when someone stole something that was quite valuable. It was worth more than, you know, like video cassettes back in the day were $120 each. And I was probably only earning $110 a day in wages. So when someone stole something, I took it personally that, you know, that was the case. And I remember my boss, who wasn't much older than me at the time, who was a family business, and he was the young son, and they were partners. And he said to me, I'm going to teach you something now. He said, it's really important. In business, 5% of people will rip you off. Smile and say goodbye, and you'll never see them again. It was the best advice I ever got. It means he didn't hold me. There was nothing I could have done wrong or done different, but it was a situation. Yeah. And it was such a healthy way to look at things. But then you have to realize, because it's really difficult, because I've been in situations even recently where someone wants to cause harm or damage something that you own, and you have to work out, well, what do I do in this situation when what you're trying to damage is worth more than I'm being paid for this particular event, and I'm responsible for the goods that I'm using here, such as microphones and speakers, etc. But it's that 5% rule. So it's a really interesting point. But at the same time, I've left
so many people behind, Jason, because they screwed me over. There's nothing you can do, right? You don't want to become like them. You know, it's people I tried to help out, you know, people I really cared about and gave opportunities to. And, you know, you just have to walk away at the end of the day. These are people I thought would be in my life forever. You know, I thought they would be in my life forever, and they're gone now, and it's a shame. And there are just people out there like that. You know, I often think, you know, I said to my daughter yesterday, I know we're all humans, but I genuinely believe, and I believe that, you know, the people who look at real science know this, that just like with dogs, where you get the golden retriever and the mastiff and the chihuahua, I think there are different breeds of human within our species. I don't know if it's discoverable via blood tests or DNA or something in the iris. I think that they know, and I genuinely believe there are different kinds of people. You know, as Clive James was writing, you know, you've got people who came as the criminals, right? They descended from the prisoners. They're your Aussie battlers, they're your tradies, they're your hard workers, you know. And then you've got the prison guard mentality. They're the dobbers. They're the people that dobbed during COVID. You know, there are celebrities out there now who were pushing jabs and lockdowns, and they're saying, oh, I didn't do that. I didn't push anything. I didn't say you should be punished. I didn't say you should lose your job and your home and therefore your children. It wasn't me. Any money I made, I gave to charity. It's a different breed within our species, and we're seeing it. This time in history is so polarizing. It's separating, right? The cream is floating to the top and the shit is floating to the bottom.
It is such a brilliant, brilliant observation that you've made, that, because it makes sense. Because if you come from the convict or the prison guard, you can't really be the same person at that level. No. You just can't be. Well, perhaps we then give the last word to the late, great George Carlin. And I tell you what, you're either pro this or you're against it. We're going to play it now. You're going to have to watch our faces as we do, because it's one of those skinny vertical video clips. But there's no one better than George Carlin. Take a look.
The planet has been here for 4.5 billion years, all right? 4.5 billion. We've been here, what, 100,000? Maybe. 200,000? Maybe. And we've only been engaged in heavy industry for a little over 200 years. 200 years versus 4.5 billion. And we have the conceit to think that somehow we're a threat, that somehow we're going to put in jeopardy this beautiful little blue-green ball that's just floating around the sun. Planet has been through a lot worse than us for a long time. Been through earthquakes, volcanoes, plate tectonics, continental drift, solar flares, sunspots, magnetic storms, the magnetic reversal of the poles, bombardments for hundreds of thousands of years by comets and asteroids and meteors, sandstorms, erosion of all kinds, cosmic radiation, worldwide fires, worldwide floods, recurring ice ages, and we think some aluminum cans and some plastic bags are going to make a difference? Planet isn't going anywhere. We are. We're going away.
Why couldn't George Carlin have been president? We'd be in a different place on this planet right now. I miss him so much.
Unbelievable. What a great comedian. Back in 1997, I was in New York, and I was staying with my best friend at the time. And one night he said, we're going to go out to this new bar called Pravda, which was a Russian vodka bar down in the Houston, they pronounce it, district anyway. So we rock up at this thing. We got a booking at 10 o'clock at night, as you do in New York, and it's a massive bar. There's probably 300-400 people in there, and we're taken right down the back, and we're seated next to this pole, and I'm ordering different types of vodka or whatever, and the people get up next to us and they move, so they leave, and I said to my mate Jamie, I said, how about we just move over there to that table, and we pick up our stuff and we move over, and just as we do it, he taps me, he says, no, sit down. I go, what do you mean? He says, have a look. And being shown to the next table was Jerry Seinfeld, along with one of his friends, maybe a colleague, something like that. And so we happened to sit next to Seinfeld for the next 2 hours, and I had a little bit of a chat to him, and he told me about George Carlin, which was incredible. Oh, wow. So Seinfeld's hero was George Carlin, and that's what just blew my mind.
That makes sense. And George Carlin, right, there's no script, there's no auto cue, there's no notes. He moves around. You know, TED Talks have got nothing on George Carlin, right? He's up and down. It's all inside him, right? And he's angry and funny all at the same time. Like, he's a bloody genius. Massive brain, because he had quite a small head, George Carlin, but he had a massive brain inside it.
And we lost him at 69. Look, at least 20 years too soon. We need more George Carlins, and tragic. But what a genius. So there it is for climate change deniers: aluminium cans and plastic bags.
What would George have said about straws, Jason? What would George have said about straws?
It's pretty much, well, I feel the same way. I noticed the other day we talked about, the car that was going to be made of plastic, that new car. And of course,
Jeff Bezos' truck, the big plastic truck that will have to be buried and will be here 40,000 years after humanity's extinct. Thanks, Jeff Bezos.
That's right. Meanwhile, you can go to the big coffee chain and order, a 1 liter iced coffee that comes in a plastic cup with a plastic lid, but a paper straw. So you can have anything you like in plastic, including all the cellophane and plastic on every piece of everything you buy in the supermarket, except for the drinking straw. Can't have it on the drinking straw, but you got to pack the lettuce inside plastic. How about we unpack the lettuces and use that plastic to make straws? Just on the lettuce alone.
What about politicians and their core flutes? You know this, Jason. There is so much ink on these core flutes that when you get the packet, when it arrives from the post office, they warn you, open all the windows in your house. It smells like shit, excuse my French. So for these big political parties that get loads of these core flutes, where are they now? Where do they get burnt or buried or disposed of? They're not very good for the environment, but oh my God, we'd never get rid of core flutes.
No, well, we should make them out of, maybe it should be out of dissolving paper for the next election.
And black and white. No poisonous ink.
That's a good point too. And then we'll see how unglamorous everyone is. Yeah, well, it's been another interesting show, second of the week, and we shall continue. And we're going to be interviewed on someone else's show tomorrow. We'll mention that probably in tomorrow's recording as well. So the two of us are going to go on and we're going to talk about a number of different issues on a new show, which is exciting. But we look forward to seeing what's going to happen in the rest of the week. It promises to be another massive week of news here in Australia and around the world.
Yes, Jason and I will be guests tomorrow. I won't tell you where. You can probably guess if you watch this show, but we'll announce it tomorrow. We'll be the guests. We won't be the ones asking the questions and bringing the news. We'll be answering them. And I'll tell you what, you don't want to take the gloves off and let Nicola and Jason answer questions. That'll be a big episode. Thank you so much for watching The Daily Australian with myself, Nicola Charles, and my co-host and co-producer, Jason Olbourne, who does a fantastic job with this wonderful new show. We will see you tomorrow and do this all over again.